Hi, and welcome to Module 4, Assessment and Observation. In this module, you will explore many aspects of using observation and assessment to understand where children are on the SEL and APL learning continuum, so that educators can plan and take the next steps to help children improve their SEL and APL skills. Topics covered include using the assessment cycle, types of assessment, guidance for observing children in familiar settings, and at spontaneous moments as the basis for authentic and formative assessments, documentation practices, and using the SEL-APL standards as benchmarks for understanding where children are on a continuum to inform setting their goals for their progress. Please note the icons that are used throughout the module, and also please remember that you can always pause this video if you need additional time to review the slide. These are the learning objectives for Module 4. Please take a moment to review them. This is the agenda for Module 4. We'll be looking at assessments, definitions, and dispositions, the assessment cycle itself, types of assessment, screening, observation, and formative assessment, documentation guidelines, using tools to assess children on the continuum, and using the standards to inform our assessments. The greatest opportunity for learning lies in moments of educator-child interactions when the educator crafts learning experiences that stretch the children just beyond their current skill level. This is a reminder of scaffolding, which we spoke about earlier. When interacting with children, it's up to the educator to take the lead and adjust to children if they want to have powerful interactions. It's helpful to think about ways in which educators and individual children may differ. Here are some of those differences: temperament, preferences and interests, language, cultural beliefs, such as beliefs about child rearing, beliefs about appropriate ways to communicate, beliefs about children's independence. Every day, educators have dozens of interactions with children. Those powerful interactions between adult and children play an important role in children's emotional well-being and learning. In the words of Hamre and Pianta, the quality of everyday classroom interactions in the form of instructional and emotional support moderates the risk of early school failure. Positive relationships between children and teachers are the foundation for children's exploration of and learning within the classroom. As children develop trust in their teachers, they become more likely to take on new challenges, continue trying, and ask questions when confused. All of these behaviors enhance learning. You make the difference. Your interactions with children affect how they will feel about themselves and how they will learn. Who you are as an educator, your professional development, your emotional intelligence, shapes your decisions about what you say and do as you interact with children. Your smile and sense of humor, the words you choose, the interests you share, and your curiosity are like that of no other teacher. Make sure to look at Building Supportive Environments, which was referenced in Module 3. It can be found in Blackboard under Course Resources in the course menu. One of the most consistent findings in early childhood literature is that an emotionally warm and a positive approach in learning situations leads to constructive behavior in children. As stated in Victoria Early Years Learning and Developmental Framework 2011, dispositions are frequent and voluntary habits of thinking and doing. Lillian Katz has pondered, spoken, and written about the role of disposition in children's education for nearly 30 years. She defines a disposition as a pattern of behavior exhibited frequently in the absence of coercion, constituting a habit of mind under some conscious and voluntary control, intentional and oriented towards broad goals. This slide is about dispositions towards observation and assessment. If I have these dispositions, then I will redefine assessment to mean learning about the learner, realize that the environment is my ally, use observation, documentation, and assessment to support children's cultural competence, see myself as deserving of time in my workday to reflect on observations and documentation and value my own learning process, and experience wonder, joy, and discovery in all aspects of my daily practice. Quality assessment for curriculum and instructional purposes is a matter of collecting information that is directly relevant and useful for planning curriculum and activities, creates individualized plans to support children's learning, and monitors progress towards learning goals. Presumably, the goal of SEL assessment is to elucidate students' SEL strengths and weaknesses and assist in making data-informed decisions that will help facilitate children's SEL, thereby fostering broad, long-term positive outcomes. The means by which these outcomes can take place is via planning, assessment-based classroom instruction, and broader SEL programming. You can also find a copy of the assessment cycle on page 11 of Booklet 1. Assessment is a cyclical process involving several steps. It begins with a question, often something you want to learn that arises because you must make a decision. Depending on the question, information is collected in a variety of ways. Once collected, this information is referred to as data and evidence. Next, you interpret the data. Then, based on what you've learned, you decide how to support a child's development and learning, the focus of your next assessment activities. And then the cycle begins again. This is your first assignment for Module 4. It's a journal entry about the assessment cycle. First, you will take a moment to reflect on a challenging situation related to social and emotional learning in your educational setting. Please refer to page 12 in your course resource booklet 1 for an example. Thinking of your specific educational setting challenge, write a Blackboard journal entry of at least 250 words addressing the questions listed under each of the 4 steps of the assessment cycle on page 11 of the same booklet. Please remember that this is due on Wednesday of the 4th week of the course. Please read through this slide. SEL and APL skills should be observed and integrated with other assessments taking place at the school or early childhood program. Children and adolescents' social and emotional learning has become an important topic because of its conceptual and empirical links with children's academic readiness and success, school adjustment, social relations, personal well-being, mental health, and ultimate workplace performance and general adaptive resilience in the face of stressful circumstances. Methods exist for assessing children's social skills include direct observation, interviews, role plays, and rating skills. Over the past 2 decades, however, the most frequently used of these methods for assessing social skills has been rating scales. There are a number of reasons for this rating scales preference. Behavior rating scales and inventories are versatile assessment tools and are the most common method of quantifying teacher and parent judgment. For the purposes of this course, we are going to be concentrating our efforts primarily on formative assessment and the role of observation in SEL and APL. In addition to assessing and screening individual children, it's very important to do programmatic assessment of how the environment, interactions, curriculum, and climate support SEL for all children. The next slide describes a tool for programmatic assessment, the CLASS tool, which provides useful data related to SEL. This is the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or CLASS tool. This is an example of the emotional support domain. It looks at positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity, and regard for student perspectives. You can find detailed description of all these different items on the CLASS tool example, which can be found on Blackboard under Module 4 Course Resources. The CLASS tool is an observation instrument that assesses the quality of teacher-child interactions in center-based preschool classrooms. CLASS includes 3 domains or categories of teacher interactions that support children's learning and development. These are emotional support, which is on the slide, classroom organization, and instructional support. Within each domain are dimensions which capture more specific details about teachers' interactions with children. CLASS is notable in the context of SEL assessment. CLASS is a proven observational instrument assessing classroom quality in preschool through 12th grade classrooms, focusing on quality of teachers' emotional, organizational, and instructional interventions with students. CLASS is being used around the country and has been adopted in every Head Start classroom in the United States. It's also in 700 pre-K classrooms in the Chicago area and will be integrated into over 4,000 classrooms in Georgia. Training sessions for class observers have been conducted in nearly every state. You can find examples of the Ages and Stages Questionnaire Social Emotional, or ASQSE, under Blackboard, Module 4, Resources. The ASQSE is a research-based, highly reliable, systematic screening tool that is focused solely on the social and emotional development of young children. This is one tool that is commonly used in early childhood programs in Massachusetts and recommended by EEC. The ASQ and the ASQSE are brief, simple procedures used to identify potential developmental concerns in children who may need additional evaluation. These tools are sometimes incorrectly used as assessment tools and not as screening tools. They are designed to indicate the need for a referral for further assessment. They are also intended to be used only as screening tools, not as assessment tools. There is a significant difference between the ASQ and the ASQSE. The ASQ has a social-emotional component to it, however it also screens 4 other domains. The ASQSE screening tool is exclusively for social, emotional, and developmental concerns. The ASQ screens children from 1 month to 60 months, and the ASQSE screens children from 1 month to 72 months. We will now be looking at observation and formative assessment for SEL and APL. The definition of formative assessment is planned, ongoing observations and documentation that provide evidence about children's skill and progress towards learning goals to enable educators to adjust their instruction accordingly. Observation is essential to formative assessment. When you observe, you slow down, listen more carefully, and pause to reflect before stepping in to offer direction or help. You see and respond to who a child is and what a child needs. Observing helps you build relationships by revealing the uniqueness of every child, including the child's temperament, strength, personality, work style, and preferred mode of expression. These points about observation are applicable about all aspects of children's development. However, for this course, we will be looking at observation through the lens of supporting SEL and APL. Observation is essential to formative assessment, especially in relationship to SEL and APL. As Louise Boyd Cadwell said in 2003, we want to know what the children think, feel, and wonder. We believe that the children will have things to tell each other and us that we have never heard before. We are always listening for a surprise and a birth of a new idea. This practice supports us searching together for new meaning. Together, we will become a community of seekers. Why do we observe? Curiosity. Observing with purpose and intention requires you to slow your pace and let yourself be curious about children. Whether you are new to teaching or a veteran, maintaining an attitude of wonder about children means asking questions such as, what is this child like? And how does this child respond to different situations? I want to get to know each child and build positive relationships. The information you gain from observing helps you connect with children and build relationships with them and families. Respectful, sensitive, nurturing relationships with each child and family are prerequisites to helping a child grow and learn. Strong relationships develop from knowing children extremely well. When you are engaged, you gather details about a child that leads to respect and appreciation and the hallmarks of a positive relationship. Development and learning. As you form strong, positive relationships with children, your curiosity about them is likely to increase. Asking questions about children's development and learning leads to deeper understanding of their SEL and APL skills. Finding out how each child grows and learns is the third most powerful motivation to observe. Observing for these 3 reasons lead to the 4th and the most complex reason. Responsive teaching. Observing gives you information you need to make decisions so that you can respond to children thoughtfully rather than simply react. This greatly increases the chances that what you say and do to guide a child's development and learning will bring positive results. Before watching the video, consider reflecting on the following question. If you were an educator with the goal of supporting SEL and APL in this child, which of the 4 reasons would be your primary motivation for observing this child? Here are a few framing questions which may identify some of the major themes when practitioners observe, assess, and screen children. They are: how does observation let you in on who the child is and the nature of the child's experience in the program? How can documentation give children a voice? How can your everyday observations and study of documentation be used to meet assessment tool requirements? How does observing and studying documentation assist you in scaffolding children's learning and assist you in examining children's developmental theory? How can you partner with families to further your understanding of observations and documentation?
All right, we're going to check her temperature, okay? Check her temperature. You want to hold her? Dulce, hold your baby while she's checking, because babies get scared in the doctor's office. Okay, look at the thermometer. Does she have a fever or not, Marisela?
No.
No fever? Okay, so I'll put down no fever. She's okay. But is she still crying? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You know what? Where's the tape measure? Let's see how tall she is, okay? You want to help me with this? Hold on. See how tall. Oh, you're going to give her some medicine? That's a good idea. You're going to measure her head first? You're going to give her some medicine? My goodness, she's got a lot.
Tengo también un perrito, pero se lo di a Oprah.
So you have a dog? Un perrito?
Sí, se lo di a Oprah.
Oh.
Solo un ratito.
Oh, okay. Abra, are you going to be a people doctor or a
Solo un
veterinarian?
ratito. Solo un
An
ratito.
animal doctor. You want to be a people doctor? Which person do you want to help today? You want to help Dulcie? Did you ask her if she's feeling well? You need to talk to her. Ah, you have a dog. You need to ask her if she's feeling well. If you're going to have her, if you're going to help her.
Un rato.
Oh, maybe she wants you to take care of her dog instead. Is her dog sick? Marisela, is there anything else you need to do with the baby? Did you give her medicine already?
Le duelen.
Right there? Right there, the dog too. So you have a sick baby and a sick dog both?
A la cabeza también.
Oh, in la cabeza, in the head. I'm sorry. Are you going to give her medicine right there in her mouth? Very good. Does it taste like bubble gum? What other kind of medicine does she have? You have chocolate medicine? That sounds pretty good, actually. Okay. Anything else? And is that for medicine? Okay, is that the chocolate medicine? Okay, so where's she going to get that? What happened, Abra? Tell me, what's in there?
Cheese.
Cheese is in there? Somebody put cheese in the maple syrup? Oh, one of the needles, or is there really cheese in there? Oh, is that for your dog? And what's going on with your dog? ¿Qué pasa con...
Te debes de poner crema.
You're putting cream on him? And where? ¿Dónde? ¿En su cabeza?
Ajá, para que no se queme.
Does his
Que se
head hurt?
quemó a la cabeza por eso.
For that, I am sorry to hear that he does not feel well.
Ahora sí, mi perrito está
Your little
bien.
dog right there. And now, can he go for a walk? ¿Puede ir afuera ahora o hace muy frío? Or is it too cold?
No, es que se quema con el sol.
Oh, he's going to go out and sit in the sun? My dogs like to do that too, I have to say. Oh my goodness, she's getting every kind of medicine you can think of, isn't she? Is she going to get better? And you're rubbing it in very gently?
Oh.
Or you go to the sun table. All right. I'll go over the stairs over here. Is that okay? Thank you.
An additional question to consider now that you've watched the video is, in terms of the child's SEL and APL development, consider the advantages of taking a different perspective as the focus of the observation. As discussed in Module 1, learning activities aligned with SEL and APL standards help children to integrate thinking, feeling, and behaving, which ultimately promotes social and emotional learning, academic learning, and success in life. Please take a moment to review the dispositions towards observation and assessment on slide 14 of this PowerPoint video. Please take a few moments to reflect on the following questions. Some of the key questions to consider in thinking about the connection between observation and assessment of SEL and APL include: what should be the focus of attention? Begin by noticing everything and use the social emotional learning and approaches to play and learning standards as a guide to think about what you see. The more you work on the standards, the easier it is to see evidence of children's learning in just about everything that they do. The standards can also remind us to look for learning we might not normally pay attention to. What is worth recording and how? Use the social emotional learning and approaches to play and learning standards as a guide to what is most important to record. Scribbled notes, jotting, and quick annotations on a photo do not always need to be rewritten neatly or typed, and can contribute to reflecting on children's learning. You can decide later about what to spend time on recording more neatly and formally. How can observations be organized to be meaningful and contribute when assessing SEL and APL competencies? Formative assessment tools we will discuss in this module include the working sample system, high scope core. It is important to find strategies that capture critical information and that are efficient uses of time. Keep in mind that the purpose of assessment is to inform curriculum decisions and enrich communication with families. There are many other ways to learn about children's SEL and APL skills while you observe them. Some examples are as follows. Watch them with family members when they arrive and leave at the end of the day, which is looking at SEL 5. Observe them engaging in daily routines, jotting down what they're doing or saying, which is SEL 3. Watch them as they play and work with materials and other children, making notes about what you see, which is APL 4. Talk with them about what they're doing and making, for example, when they explore Play-Doh, paint, write, or build with blocks, which is APL 2. Ask questions that encourage them to describe their thinking and listen carefully to their responses, APL 6. Listen as they talk with others informally and during group discussions, jotting down notes about what they say, which is SEL 6. Please take a moment to think about your initial impressions of this child. Please pause the video to do so. Here are some facts about this child. She's Ethiopian. She has 2 American dads. She has an older brother. And she's 3.6 years old. There may be more concern about assessing children in the areas of SEL and APL and more opportunities for introducing bias than in the assessment of other areas such as early literacy skills. It's critical that the educator be aware of his or her own possible biases during assessments and observations. Becoming more self-aware begins with examining yourself. We each bring our own experiences, perspectives, and worldview to our work, the positives, the challenges, and everything in between. These experiences and perspectives are what make us who we are and influence our practice with children, families, and colleagues. We also hold in our mind a picture of our ideal selves. Knowing more about yourself can pave the way to becoming the person and the early educator that more closely matches your ideal self. This first key to reflection and inquiry can help you become more self-aware and intentional in examining who you are and who you want to become. Variations in this approach towards learning within and between cultures must be respected in order to enhance and not discourage children's engagement. Our APL focus for this vignette is Initiative 1 on page 22 of the Standards booklet. Shyness, cultural differences, or prior experience may inhibit initiative but need not be a barrier to success. Other skills associated with initiative include planning, prediction, and anticipation. Becoming aware of your own bias and interpretations will increase the chances that your observations will give you insight into children and that your relationships with them will be authentic. This will be further discussed on a following slide. The importance of family engagement, learning about families and their culture, will also be discussed in Module 5. Please take a moment to reflect on the first impressions you had when you saw the initial picture of the child 2 slides before. This child is Selena. Now take a moment to pause the video and read the vignette about Selena on page 14 of the Course Resources Booklet 1. Reflect on any shift that may have happened in your impressions of Selena after reading the vignette. Now, thinking of a child that you have worked with, and reflect on one way that you might become more aware of your own bias and how it influences your observations specifically for SEL and APL skill development. Please look at page 22 of the Standards booklet for APL 1. Please also look at page 16 of Booklet 2, which has this connecting to the standards. In the case of Selena, she has so much initiative that it's negatively impacting her peer relationships. Helping her with APL 1 would entail modeling and scaffolding behavior that allows other children to do things on their own without her intervention, allowing her to apply the skill of self-regulation to her natural inclination towards too much initiative. We have focused a lot on building specific SEL and APL skills. However, it's also balancing of multiple SEL and APL skills, which will lead to academic, peer relationships, and lifelong success. Looking at the previous vignette in relationship to APL 1, consider how you might support Selena to improve her peer relations. SEL 5, Empathy, also connects to Selena. The educator could help her counterbalance her strong initiative with improved empathy and scaffold for her the ability to read the cues of her peers more accurately. Please look at the Course Resource Booklet 1 on page 13 for this resource, which helps educators avoid bias in observation and documentation. We need to document children's SEL and APL skill learning to gather and analyze information about what children know, what they can do, and how they understand it. All this is part of an ongoing cycle that includes planning, documenting, and evaluating children's learning. Documented records of children's assessments and evaluations can be effective ways to support and extend children's thinking, learning, and development. Try different methods to find what is realistic, achievable, and relevant for children, families, and educators. Use the standards as benchmarks that are viewed regularly. Share documentation efforts and experiences and continue to learn, grow, and develop. Be open to change as the dynamics of children's groups and teams change. Make it relevant for settings as documentation will look different across different settings. For example, full-day childcare, family childcare, out-of-school time care, and preschool require different methods of documenting given that children vary in ages and amounts of times they spend in these settings. Please take a moment to review the vignette for Selena in your Course Resource Booklet 1 on page 14. After reviewing the vignette for Selena, please look at the examples of evidence which is below the vignette on page 14 and continues on to page 15. This illustrates competencies related to the APL 1 standard. You can use the continuum to identify Selena's current ability level. Since Selena is 3.6 years old, start with the preschool column, which demonstrates competency and developmental progression typical for this age. This slide shows the developmental progression that children may experience in developing initiative, self-direction, and independence. Educators use a continuum to identify a child's current ability level, as well as the next steps along the continuum. However, it's critical to keep in mind that not all children will reach those levels at the same time or any specific age, nor will all children achieve competencies on every item illustrated in the examples of evidence. The standards and the evidence provide a guide to understanding and enabling children's ability to integrate thoughts, feelings, and behavior in order to achieve goals and success. The examples of evidence are not intended to be used as a checklist items to measure children's achievement or success, but rather to illustrate behaviors that might be observed at the end of preschool and the end of kindergarten. Please note that the examples of evidence under the column "The Older Toddler May" are excerpts from the Early Learning Guidelines for Infants and Toddlers and not included in the SEL APL Standards for Pre-K and Kindergarten. Authentic assessment of the standards is best approached as a continuum of progress. Development along this continuum is a dynamic, ongoing process that each individual experiences in a unique way. This is the second assignment for Module 4. Please follow the instructions on the slide. The instructions can also be found on Blackboard under Module 4 Discussion Board on the Module 4 Discussion Forum. Please remember that your initial post is due on the Sunday of the 4th week of the course, and your response posts are due on Wednesday of the 4th week of the course. These 3 research-based formative assessment tools have been approved by EEC for use in the Massachusetts Early Education programs. The 3 columns include indicators from each tool that are related to the APL 1 standard. Even though there are some differences in the indicators, all 3 of the tools can help teachers understand children's development in this area. Formative assessment owes its current popularity to a publication in 1998 in which Black and William provided a synthesis of research on the topic. Their overall conclusion was that formative assessment is potentially one of the most powerful tools that a classroom educator can use to enhance student learning. The purpose of formative assessment is to provide feedback to teachers and students during the course of learning about the gap between students' current and desired performance so that action can be taken to close the gap. When thinking of a model of formative assessment to use in a classroom setting, the following should be provided: explicit learning goals regarding SEL and APL skills, progress towards these goals, and guidance and steps needed to progress towards these goals. These are additional SEL assessment tools for preschool and kindergarten. On the left you have grade level, in the middle the tool, and on the right the construct assessed. As you can see from this table, there are no current tools that assess in all areas of SEL. CASEL has recommended these tools. However, there are no SEL assessment tools recommended by the standards or endorsed by EEC or ESE. Although none assess all areas of SEL, schools can benefit from using any of the assessments reviewed. All of the assessments have the following strengths. All of the teacher versions were appropriate for students in grades pre-K through 8. They can be administered by teachers, school personnel, and mental health professionals. They can be completed in 10 to 20 minutes per student. They provide standards or benchmarks that can be used to compare individual student scores. According to their manuals, they have established reliability and validity. And they state that they can be used for multiple purposes, including student assessment, screening, and evaluating programs and effects. The National Research Council's review of early childhood assessment indicates that any measurement of children should be guided by 2 principles. The first is purposefulness, in which the measure is designed or selected based on how it will be used, such as to evaluate program outcomes or to assess a child's functional capabilities. The second is systematicity, in which assessments are only given in the context of care and educational support that can constructively use the data to promote the children's optimal development. As SEL standards become more widely adopted, it is increasingly important to develop tools to measure SEL. In order to identify and develop measures of SEL for practitioners, in 2008, CASEL convened the Preschool to Elementary School Social and Emotional Learning Assessment Workgroup to consider how best to assess SEL among preschool through grade 5 children, including identifying several quality teacher rating measures for assessing students' SEL. This is a summary of using the standards to inform assessment. Relations among the elements include: standards are, or should be, created to correspond to these important SEL competencies. Developmental tasks are the foundation upon which SEL competencies are demonstrated and developed. Standards inform assessments and vice versa. Both standards and assessments are useful in that they lead to instruction, which often leads to the need for further regular assessment and revised standards, and is supported by both professional development and curriculum. And change in SEL skills is the end point towards which we strive. We have talked a lot about the education setting, but moving into Module 5, we will now look more closely at engaging families to support SEL and APL development in children in the home. There are many ways in which families can be encouraged or invited to participate in the assessment cycle. Reflect for a moment on how you would invite families to participate in the assessment cycle, or how you might begin to do so if you were not already doing this. If you are a parent, do you remember how it felt when you realized that an educator both understood your child's uniqueness and enjoyed teaching him or her? Families need to be understood and appreciated, but they also need to know that educators see, understand, and appreciate their children. Please take a moment to review the key points from Module 4. This concludes Module 4 PowerPoint. Please return to Blackboard and complete your assignments if you've not already done so. Please make sure also to complete the assessment of learning for this module. Thanks.